Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
Welcome. It's Tuesday. It is Tuesday, December 11th. We are closing up 2018 faster than I think I like. I have to admit, all the way around, the way things and how fast things are moving in December, specifically this December, is telling me what January, February, and March will look like. And so I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about everything else, which means this show is exactly what we need today. This is the show called Just Ask Already. If things are moving fast, or if they're moving really slow, or if they're really bumpy, or if they're really unexpected, whatever things are looking like for you, settle in, take a look around, and join me as I speak with Nathalie today. And the reason is because when we ask already, right, program 190 of the Voice of Bold Business Radio, we are taking control. We are finding what we need to do and how we need to do it, because it's easy to assume. It's easy to let our brain take shortcuts. And when we get right down to it, when we don't ask, we are letting opportunities sit on the table. It's amazing what we can learn and what we're able to receive by willing to speak up for what we want. Today, I'm speaking with Nathalie Gregg. She is a change agent. She is an organizational developer. She is an an adjunct professor, public speaker, published writer. She's also a television personality. And you want to know what else? She believes that leadership is a lifestyle and entrepreneurship is a mindset, and that those can go into every situation that we have. Her battle cry, especially for women, is to lead loudly, be bold, be fearless. Nathalie, welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio.
Thank you so much, Jess. I am so excited about being here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. Look forward to our conversation.
I have been waiting and waiting and waiting. So here, right before we went on, I said, Nathalie, I have a story to tell, and it's really unexpected. And so here's the story, Nathalie. I'm in this is my home office, and I record from my home office. I was refreshing my tea, and I'm walking around the kitchen, and I stopped to get a tea bag and blow out a candle that was setting the stage for some baking that had been happening last night. And all of a sudden, my foot hurts. And I'm like, what is going on? And I pick up my foot, and there's a wasp underneath my foot that had been repeatedly stinging in the bottom of my foot. And so I'm like,
my goodness,
what is happening? Right? So, and I had just come off of two great, amazing calls with Rebecca Davidson, and of course, now the other person, I apologize because you're probably watching too. I was all revved up. I was super excited. And then I'm like, what is happening? What is happening? What is going on with this wasp right here? So there's a meaning to be uncovered in this show. And I think it's about taking control. And I think it's about understanding a structure. And I think it's about really being able to own the space that we are in and find our confidence to ask. So anyway, that's how I'm going to start the show this morning, Nathalie.
Fantastic. That's a rip-roaring start. I hope your foot feels better.
I do too. Oh, goodness. Well, so I would love to know, as would our audience, how did you start down this path for fearlessness and being able to go forward with confidence?
It started several years ago when now a colleague of mine, she was a female CEO of a tech company that was in the incubator of the University of South Carolina. And I thought that was so cool. And I actually stalked, for lack of a better word, Cheryl for about a year. And I said to her, I really need your help. At that time, I was executive director of a nonprofit. And I had this grandiose idea to put this nonprofit in a project management framework while I was going to business school at the same time. Yes, Jess, I bumped my head. I really did. So I would stalk her and I send her emails and I would call her and I would say, "Would you please go to lunch with me?" And she said, "No, for a year." And so I said to her in the email, I said, "I really think it's cool that you are the CEO of a tech company in the incubator because that's really a truly male dominant place." And so then she warmed up a little bit. And finally she said, yes, she would go to lunch with me after one whole year. And I knew at that time, I said, I'm going to have to change my strategy and really become fearless in the ask, because at this point, the things that I want to do, I'm going to have an internal team as well as an external team to help me be successful. And that's kind of how the story started.
Amazing. That self-realization and that self-awareness. Was it hard for you to look at and say, wow, I do have to be fearless here? Was that hard to own?
It still is a becoming piece, because some days I do it extremely well, and then other days I fail greatly. So understanding that the days I fail greatly, I have to reach out to trusted advisors, trusted team members, trusted friends, also all of my people that I conversate back and forth on LinkedIn and Twitter as well as Facebook. I still have to continue to ask, even the days that I don't feel like it. Maybe some days I don't feel like being bold in the ask. So maybe I have to ask someone else to help with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So what's the first step, right? You said sometimes you're really good at it and sometimes you're not. So I'm thinking about between the two, and I'm thinking about that ebb and that flow. And one of the things that is really important that you have brought up is that we're not good at a skill that we're good at overall all of the time. And if I were to say
Sure.
that differently, right? So let me say it, let's see if I can say it a little clearer, which is regardless of our skill set and how strong those skills are, there are still times that we don't feel as confident in them. We don't use them to their fullest capability for whatever reason. And so in thinking about that and how we, how we go forward, what do you do to increase your own confidence on the days that you really just don't wanna?
Well, I talk to myself continuously.
Me
I,
too.
I believe in affirmations. I say them continuously. And I am so grateful that I have a tribe of advisors and also trusted colleagues that continue to encourage me and pick me up and cheer me on. I talked to two of them before getting on the Voice of the Bold radio today. So
Yes.
it's a continuous process.
Isn't it? And there are days when I come on, whether it's the show, whether it's walking into a client site, whether it's sitting down, and I'll tell you, Nathalie, we're getting ready to do a rapid growth webinar in January. It's our third in a
Oh,
series.
exciting.
And it's really cool. And so
Mm-hmm.
I put an article together to go with each of these webinars that really goes, do I understand what I'm talking about enough? And basically prove to myself I have all of the pieces. Well, I will tell you,
Mm-hmm.
I had a deadline of Sunday night to write this article, and I had been working a little bit at it for the last week. I would sit down and I would have nothing, and I would make myself sit for like 10 minutes
Yes.
at a time, at a minimum, and see if anything would come. Could I write a sentence? Could I write a word? And
Mm-hmm.
it eluded me, and it eluded me. And Sunday night came around, and then I was really stressed, but at least I got it started on Sunday night, right? So then I had this little this little exciting energy that came through. And I
Mm-hmm.
woke up in the morning and Carter was asking me, he saw me fretting a little bit and he goes, Mom, what's up? And I said, well, I've missed a deadline, and it's a deadline to be able to promote this thing that I'm doing. And I didn't get my work done, which means somebody else on my team, and in this case, it's Pam,
Right.
is now behind and waiting on me. And she was great. She goes, hey,
Mm-hmm.
Jess, do I have that thing yet? She was really proactive. And I'm like, I'm sorry. It's not coming. I'm sorry. And Carter goes, well, what are you doing having breakfast with me? Go to work, Mom. Isn't that cute?
Oh, absolutely. You should have picked up the phone and called me, Jess. I would have helped.
Right? Our tribe can come from anywhere. And so,
Exactly.
but it took all of yesterday and all of last night and into this
Mm-hmm.
morning. And finally I was like, it was like pulling teeth. But when I got done and I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, this is great. How amazing
Fantastic.
the continuous to go back, to go back,
Mhm.
to go back, to go back. And I feel like that's a similar process of this concept of an ask. Maybe
Mhm.
the first time all we can do is pick up the phone or open the
Right.
email or
Exactly.
whatever we're going to use our thumbs on, right?
That's true.
Um, and then sometimes we might actually get it started. And eventually we might hit the go button. And
Mhm.
eventually somebody on the other end we might not be leaving messages anymore. We might actually get a person, and then what?
That's true. That is so true.
Yeah. And I think it could
Mhm.
be for the ask. I think it could be for getting something done. I also think it could be for thinking. Have you ever thought about
Mhm.
thinking? I mean, just sitting to think?
Yes, because it's amazing what can go on in your head when you actually sit down to think, and when you actually start the process of basically getting away from the noise and really getting focused in on what you want to accomplish. It's amazing what things happen at that time.
Uh, so I'm thinking, look, I'm going to use the word thinking now all day, probably through our entire show. When we hold back and we don't ask
Mhm.
for what we want, what are some of the reasons for that, do you think?
Frustration. I think a lot of times that we know innately that we can do it, that we make that ask, that the person is going to say yes, or the person is going to channel us to a resource. But I think a lot of times that we don't ask because we fear that we're not going to get what we're looking for, or we fear that it's going to be rejection, or we feel like that the person is going to judge us and say, why is she asking for that? She knows she's not competent enough to ask for that. So I think there's so many that goes on, between our ears that make us a little hesitant about making the ask. But once you actually do it, then I think it becomes easier. It's like exercise. It becomes easier the more you do it.
And it's so funny. So yeah, and is exercise a mindset? I just got to know what you think about this. Is that something you got to do? Is that the behavior you just got to do, or is that like actually a mindset?
Interesting enough, I had that conversation last night with a colleague of mine who just became a fitness instructor. We were talking about behavior and mindset as a result to exercise.
Wow. What did they
hmm
say, or what came out of the conversation?
Well, she's more on the mindset side of it than the behavioral side of it. So we'll see what happens after we finish her brand.
I love it. That's so great. And it's so
hmm
cool having those types of conversations,
Oh, it is.
the space for that. And how does discipline fit into this, right? This willingness to ask, this ability to ask, and
hmm
then pairing them up and actually doing it.
Well, you definitely have to be disciplined. And I think a lot of times we beat ourselves up just because we're not the same every day. Some days we're extremely disciplined, and then some days we're like, okay, who is this person? I can't write two sentences. I can't put two sentences together to actually make a strong conversation, those kinds of things. So I think we really need to focus on the days when we're in flow and we're really in that space, that we really focus on the things that we need to get done right then and there. And the days that we aren't, give ourselves some grace and give us ideas and ways that we can kind of redirect ourselves, but not beat ourselves up, so we can get back in the flow, so we can get back in that fearless ask.
There is a quote from a book that I have not been reading. However, it's being shared with me, the outcomes of this. Let me see if I
hmm
can find this. Oh, here it is. When your skills roughly match your challenges, you go into a flow state. What would your response be to that?
I agree. I agree. I think sometimes that a lot of times we overthink things, and it's the simplicity of things that actually help us, I think, a lot of times stay in the flow, because we tend to overcomplicate things. I know that I do. It's amazing what the things that I can come up with in my mind.
I tell you what. The realities, yeah, that's so true. The realities that go between,
Yes.
between our ears, the movies that we
hmm
play, the scenarios that we make, right? Uh, we just saw last week A Christmas Story with the Red
Mhm.
Ryder BB gun, right?
Right. You
I
shoot the
don't
eye
know
out.
if you've seen that movie, even the
Yes.
play, they did a great job. All of the imagination that comes into that and
Mhm.
all of these things that are being thought about and daydreaming and wishing and
Mhm.
then being able to take the steps. One of the things I love about this movie, right? So take these things that other stuff has and apply it to business, apply it to how we're developing professionally. Is that
Right.
the time to daydream, the willingness and the want to
Mhm.
daydream? How's that going to work? What am I going to strategize? How is it
Mhm.
going to play out? And then looking to see if it actually does, right? Some of the times he's like, I've got to, this is how it's got to go down. And then he blurts something out and it's nothing like what he thought.
That's right.
How do you recover from something like that, right? I'm thinking about this, applying it to business, applying it to career development.
Mhm.
Do you treat it like you're 10 years old, like he is in the movie ish? Or is it different because we're supposed to be grown up?
Well, I think it kind of depends upon the environment, and I think as long as we have open communication
Yeah.
about it, we fail greatly each day, all day long. And sometimes it's the public failures that we see most. And we just have to know that failure is part of leadership, failure is part of growth. And understanding that when we fail, not if we fail, it's when we fail, how do we recover? What's our recovery plan? Is it a conversation going back to the person said, I'm sorry that my communication about that project was not on point, and this is what I needed to say as opposed to what, I said. So
Mhm.
I think keeping those lines of communication open is basically key, for when we fail.
And there's a fierceness. There's a fierce muscle, right? How do we embrace
Absolutely.
fierce with beauty and tact and simplicity, all the words that you have said or implied
Hmm.
so far, right? This
Right.
concept of this muscle of fierceness, yet with tenderness and grace at the same time. I'm fascinated, and my brain is going faster than the words can
Hmm.
for me come out of my mouth, right? So I'm thinking about
Right.
this, and I think part of this fierceness and this grace is to let the things
Hmm.
go, to own them,
Yes.
to show up
Hmm.
and say them, and then to let them go.
Yes, ma'am.
Um, and there's sometimes there's no good way. There's not a tactful way to say, wow, I messed up. So we just kind of have to
Hmm.
do that blurt thing. Hey, blah, 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 right? And however it comes out, it comes
Sure.
out. Because when we have the
Exactly.
right intention, things tend to work out, even if they're a little bumpy along the way. It's still the shortest path.
Hmm. Right.
Do you practice letting go?
Hmm. It depends on which day.
Uh-huh.
My coach is attempting to help me with that. That's one of the things on my to-do list for 2019.
Oh, thank you for saying it because it is bold
Absolutely.
to make a personal change like that. I'm also
Sure.
somebody who I tend to, we need a place, right? We need to put a stake in the ground to know where we're going. And then we also
Exactly.
need, and I'm using the word need here because it is all
Hmm.
perspective and subjective. We also need to go, well, what's actually tied to the stake we put into the ground? And, like the kite at the end of the line versus the cloud that's going to keep going.
Sure. That's true. That is
Yeah.
so true. Hmm.
And I think for me, I'm at that part is, well, which is the kite and which is the cloud? And how many kites do I want? As much as I like looking at the clouds, I'm never going to attach them to my stake. And
Exactly.
letting go. That was actually part of a conversation I was having with Rebecca Davidson this morning, which is why she's a avid listener of the show. She and I are working
Hmm.
together. And
Oh,
one of the things
wonderful.
that came out of that, she goes, I'm not attached. And I like paused.
Mm.
You're what? And I was, so
Right.
and that made me think about, okay, so when we know what we're working on and
Hmm.
when it lines up with the skills that we have, we tend
Yes.
to go into this flow state and things can go incredibly fast. And that
Yes.
ability to let go or discern what is attached to our stake in the sand and what is not makes a big
Hmm.
difference. because
Right.
we can do it for ourselves. Now we can model it for the team that we are a part of, the collaboration and the cooperativeness that we have in our workplace as well.
Exactly. And that is truly being fearless, Jess, when you can actually let go of it. Because I am such a creature of control by habit, and I'm a type A to the nth degree. And knowing now that if I am going to be fearless and bold and what's next for me, that I'm going to have to let go of some of this control and also deal with transparency. Okay, I got it out.
Ah, um, it's interesting. Yes. Well, thank you for saying that. And thank you for restating it the way you restated it, because there's a lot of depth here, and we can stay
Hmm.
here for a little while. Um, and anybody who's listening in and watching, the scoop comes down to, are you
Hmm.
willing to sit with things? Like,
Sure.
Nathalie's like, well, that's something I'm working on. And I'm like, hey, I'm in a different place, but I'm also working on that. And
Yes.
there's a vulnerability that shows up, which
Hmm.
is all, we can't be fierce unless we know how to be vulnerable.
Right.
When, if we were to go deeper into this and letting go, are there
Hmm.
practices that you use to stay grounded and to be as creative as possible as you're going into the workday?
Meditation,
Yeah.
yoga, affirmations, because I think that that puts me in a place where it doesn't allow my brain to take over. That it puts me in a more creative place where I can listen, that where I'm open to information coming in as well as open to conversation and things like that. I really that it helps me dissolve the barriers that I have up most of the time.
What makes you have a barrier?
I think the control factor.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
being a project manager by trade and understanding there's a start date and an end date, and I must manage the project, and those type of things, and but stepping back and actually coming in from this angle of flow and this angle of fierce and fearlessness and those type of things, it's a easier path, but it's also a more collaborative outcome that I'm able to play with a variety of colleagues, advisors, and partners from all over the world and actually get a more synergetic outcome than opposed to just me driving to get an expected result.
You just totally, you didn't even describe collaboration. It's all about cooperation. It's all
Hmm.
about the energy of the people that are
Yes,
showing up together for some sort of a
that's right.
common goal that everybody has
Hmm.
agreed upon.
Exactly.
Now, what if we got all the facets of ourselves to do the same thing?
We're on it. We're on the path to that, Jess. We are
And
on it.
I think that's a constant, I think that's a constant. And I'm thinking about the article, right, that I just wrote that'll be published later
Hmm.
this week now. And I pulled out 4 skills of being able to lead effectively. And
Yes.
really the one of the outcomes is what you were just describing, right? I was just talking
Hmm.
about discipline, accountability, responsibility, and some kind of awareness. That's not the word I used there, but that's the gist of what it was.
Sure.
And when we work with and grapple with and are willing to embrace and explore, what does it look like, feel like, and sound
Hmm.
like to be
Hmm.
accountable, to be
Yes.
responsible? It gives us a better understanding of how to read others, how to understand where their energy and their intentions are, and then to be able
Hmm.
to go back to the fearless ask for the intention that we want now that we know where the gap is.
Exactly. Exactly. Because I just asked one of my teams recently, what sets you on fire? What makes you happy and excited about the work that you do? Because that's where you're going to get the best outcome from anyone that you're working with, that they know what excites them. And also, if you're the leader or the manager or the supervisor, knowing how to tap into that so you can get the best outcome from that team member.
And this is great when we feel, right? These are the types
Yes.
of things that when we feel and we're willing to feel
Mm-hmm.
are not only intuitive, they get results and we don't know how the results are being gotten. At the
Right.
same point in time, we've got this concept of, right, I'm going to go back to this WASP story. Apparently it's supposed to be part of our conversation today. And some of the meanings behind a WASP are the structure, right? The what
Yes.
they create and how they create it so that they have a place to live and do whatever they're going to do. And so there's an
Mm-hmm.
order to it. And if we come from
Right.
it, and you being a project manager, you're also very aware, we're going to come from action. We're going to take action,
Mm-hmm.
have some sort of behavior that we follow and see an outcome. And what we're talking about with this particular set of soft skills is it's a little harder to have order. There's typically not a path to follow. It's
Mm-hmm.
and so for somebody who's coming at it from that perspective, and we're talking about like accountability and responsibility, we can describe it,
Sure.
we can feel it, we know it. And then what would you suggest for people that lead with behavior? Well, I know how to act. I know how to put order to things. How does that show up in accountability and responsibility?
Well, the interesting thing about it, we have all the members on the team, and it's important to know which member has what trigger. And there's going to be, accountability, people with accountability triggers, people with responsibility triggers, so as a person that's leading the team or as a manager of the team, it's important to know who has what trigger and also how does that trigger show up. For instance, you have some people on the team, you just tell them to go and leave them alone, stay out of their way. And then others, sometimes you have to encourage that, this is due so and so, this is due tomorrow, and this is what we need to look at so we can make sure that this happens. So that everybody's on the team, but you have to know their triggers and actually what excites them that will get them to the expected outcome.
You are listening to program 190. Just ask already. And our special guest is Nathalie Gregg, a woman of many talents, and she is fierce when it comes to asking for what she wants. So tell me, Nathalie, what's something that you have asked for what you wanted and it has leapt your project or an idea forward?
Well, the power of the fearless ask. A couple of weeks ago, I just launched a panel discussion in Charleston with the Center for Women, and the discussion was entitled "The Power of the Fearless Ask." And they wanted me to come in and actually do a workshop, and I said, "No, I don't think so. This is my idea," and I said, "I want to curate it for my LinkedIn network." And they were like, "What?" And I said, "Yes, I want to actually bring." One of them was my mentor, and two colleagues that I knew, but it was curated from my LinkedIn network. And it was a panel discussion about the fearless ask. We talked about, when did you decide you had to be fearless? We talked about networking. We talked about collaboration. We talked about responsibility, all of the things that we're discussing today. And it was so funny when I actually went into the conference, the conference manager came up to me and she said, "Do you know that your workshop is sold out?" And I said, "No." And she said, "There's a waiting list." And I was like, "Okay, fantastic. Let's start this conversation so we can be fearless in our ask."
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. I'll bet the stories go on. That's not good. That can't be the only one.
Well, that was the most recent.
Yeah, which is great. The most recent makes
That was the most recent. And then to find your in mail and my LinkedIn account, I was like, really?
Mhm.
Like, this is exciting. And then to see what you're doing with the Bold Business Radio, I'm like, this is incredible. So just to, as I said before, now being open, looking at where do I need to be fearless in my ask, but also where do I need to be fearless in collaborative partners, people that are already doing this, people are having the same conversation and deciding to be fearless themselves, because it is a decision.
Have you already you've already held your first roundtable? It's more than just an idea that came to fruition that has been sold out. You had your first one, right?
Yes, I had the first one and now I am curating the second
The
one.
second one, that is so great. That's what I thought you said, and that's what I thought we had talked about, but they were
Yes.
getting mixed in my brain because you hadn't had it when we talked and we set up this.
Right.
when we set
Oh,
up our day, right?
wow.
Yeah. What were
Yeah.
the biggest highlights and takeaways from the outcomes of the women and the people that were in that group?
Well, I asked numerous, there were about 350 women there. I took a poll. I'm always researching and taking polls. And
Yeah.
I said, has anyone asked you to mentor them? And they said no. And so I waited about a week later when I called a couple more participants and I asked them, I said, has anyone asked you to mentor them? And they said no. And I was really disheartened because I was like, all of these amazing women in one room, and no one has asked for mentorship. So I'm like, okay, that's another conversation around the power of the fearless ask. The importance of mentorship, sponsorship, collaboration. What do those things do for you as a leader? What does it do for your career as well as your business, as well as your business?
That's really interesting. I don't know if a lot of people know what having a mentor means.
Yes.
Will you
Hmm.
describe in your words what it means?
It means someone who's there to guide, encourage, motivate, and sometimes carry. I can give you an example. My first blush with the Center for Women in Charleston, South Carolina, there was a young lady in a magazine, in Success Magazine. And I went around for 3 months asking, does anyone know this lady? Does anyone know this lady? Does anyone know this lady? Because she was the founder of the Center for Women. And so when I was meeting with my mentor one morning, she said, I don't know her, but I know the CEO of the organization. I said, great. Send the email off to her, tell her I need to meet with her. I'm going to be in Charleston this day and we need to have lunch. And so talking about knowing what you want. And so an hour meeting turned into a 3-hour meeting.
Nice.
And she contacts me a week later and she says, I want you to be the keynote for our conference in February. And just she had never heard me speak before. And I was like, wow, you're taking a risk. And she actually designed everything around leading in stilettos. And she did one of the shoe designers shops to actually donate a pair of high-end stilettos, which I thought was phenomenal. And so after my keynote, this young lady with the red glasses on came up to me and she said, I heard you've been looking for me. Are you ready to play big? And I said, absolutely. And that was Jane Purdue, a young lady from Success Magazine. And my mentor, Reba Campbell, was the person that made that happen.
And it's because of conversation. It's because of saying, do you know this person? Asking the question.
Yes.
Figuring out the way that it goes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's so funny. I'm like, I have mentors. I don't know if they all know that they're my mentors because I've never formally said, will you be my mentor? I know in
And
conversations
some are informal and some formal. Absolutely. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember, I know at least with 2 of them, I've said, without your mentorship,
Mm-hmm.
I would be more lost than I am today.
Absolutely. That is so
And
true.
being able to honor, even if it is informal, that
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging that there's encouragement and support and
Yes.
caring and a place to
Mm-hmm.
practice. I mean, really, if we can't ask a
Right.
mentor, who could we
Mm-hmm.
ask at that first
Right.
step? And so that's a great place to be able to work with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions that have come in around triggers. In
Oh,
the first half
wonderful.
of the show, you were talking about triggers and knowing what triggers people to work with that. And so the first question is from
Mm-hmm.
Peter. When we talk about triggers, the first thing that comes to mind for me is manipulation. So can you explain that a little bit more from your perspective of how you're using triggers?
All of us are wired in several different ways. My trigger is it meaningful?
Mm.
Is it going to mean something to me if I do this project or if I do this work? Meaning that if it is something around women's leadership, is it something around leadership? Is it something around being bold, confident, fearless? does it have meaning for me? That's my trigger, because it's gonna have to trigger my why before I even start the work to begin with. And I'm sure, Jess, you have a trigger and triggers as well, as far as why you do what you do, as for stepping out and doing the whole piece around Bold Business, the radio show.
Right. It's true. And for me, and so what I like is the way you're describing trigger, and what I think, we automatically have. Here, let me try that again. One of those times there's too much in my brain and it all wants to come out at once. And that is that trigger tends to be a word we use when somebody gets angry or frustrated or reacts instead of responds. Right. The way I hear you using trigger, and in the answer, is that the trigger is what makes us go, what makes us turn into that Energizer bunny, what makes us
absolutely
want to be fierce to make change, which is a positive.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so looking at the positive side of what a trigger could be. And so then there was another question that has come in around trigger, and this one's from Manny. No, excuse me, I was wrong about that. This is from Maxwell. Okay, so I'm going to change his question because you answered it sort of already. So Maxwell, I apologize if you want to ask another one, keep it coming in, bring it again. When you're talking about triggers, how do I find my own?
Oh, I would suggest going back and looking and watching Simon YouTube video about finding your why.
Okay, Simon Sinek. Okay.
Yes.
We'll link to it.
Yes, awesome. As far as finding your why, and kind of sitting with yourself, Maxwell, and maybe sitting with some other trusted resources or colleagues, and really talking about the things that ignite you, the things that make you come alive, the things that make you, if you weren't paid for it, that you would work, into the wee hours of the morning without receiving a dime. Mm-hmm. And then that would show you what's your why and what you kind of triggered around, and what you think is important to you. And that's how you can come up with it. That's a beginning up for it.
It's a good first step for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, so thinking about this, I told you I was going to use thinking a lot today. So at least I honor that particular place that I am
Absolutely.
in. And we are showing up, and we are building, and we are creating right now. Right. And in that, it makes me wonder, and I'd like to explore more with you, when we're fierce, when we ask, when we go forward because we're triggered in the positive sense of the word trigger.
Right.
I know, at least in me, and maybe this is a feminine trait, and maybe this is a universal trait. There's an element that I have been conditioned by society to feel selfish for doing that. Mm-hmm. So how do we combat selfishness? And that, because I believe it's a limiting belief, right? That thinking we're selfish when we go for an ask is a limiting belief. So how do we break through that?
Oh, I'm so happy that you brought up the point about the limiting belief, because the limiting belief can really, truly be a barrier for us being fearless in our ask. Because what we believe most of the time is going to come, head forward to being able to make that ask. Mm-hmm. And believing that we're selfish, it's only selfish if we don't share it. Ooh. If we don't share our talent, if we don't share our gifts. It's only selfish if we just keep it to ourselves and we don't share it.
Abigail Manning has been on the show a couple of times, and she uses a phrase, flip a dip. So I just heard you flip a dip. This concept of taking a limiting belief and actually making it something that empowers. And so for that, there's an element of synthesizing learning in all of this. Every single thing. There's an awareness, and there's this concept of not only, yes, I am learning, I am willing to learn, and I'm willing to receive the message and the blessings and the mistakes and the whatever else in it. How do you how do you personally see yourself synthesizing all of this learning?
Exactly your description. All these things going around at one time. That's kind of sort of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And understanding where I need to be that day.
Hmm.
And I think that that's been a critical piece for me personally, as far as understanding where I need to be that day.
Okay, you just got really in your body, right? So here I am.
Yes.
I'm very perception oriented
Mhm.
context. So the bigger we go, the more excited I get.
Mhm.
But then I have to
Right.
remember that sometimes I'm the one tied to the stake, right? Not my kites.
Sure.
And sometimes it
Right.
takes a wasp to sting the bottom of my foot for me to recognize I have a body, I guess. I was so excited
Mhm.
about the show. I believe there's an element of that too. So how this getting in your body, being here right now,
Mhm.
that's a whole different kind of practice. People who lead with behavior and they lead with being able to build a structure to be able to move forward and either check things off or understand what it looks like are probably going, man, Jess, you're even crazier than normal today. But at the same point in time, yes, and I want
Mhm.
to understand how action and I watch. And this is actually where I focus a lot of my time and energy and thinking is the behaviors and the results of those behaviors. What happens when we take action and how do we take action and make it more purposeful as we go through? And somebody who is already doing that and does it well, they might want to do the opposite or attempt to do the opposite to get
Mhm.
more context, to learn more. How do I take all this diffuseness out here and talk about how a wasp fits into a fearless ask that fits into lifelong learning, that fits into women's leadership and empowerment? Well, we've
Mhm.
done it here.
That's right. Absolutely. We check that box off.
Check. And and
Yes.
if we when we need a structure, right? The radio
Mhm.
show is a structure. It's a place
Right.
for us to come to learn. And you're right. My one of my triggers is I learn by conversation. And so
Mhm.
by having conversations that I'm going to have anyway and doing it in such a way and putting a structure around it that it can also
Sure.
be shared with somebody else who's on a path of learning, a path
Mhm.
of problem solving, a path of leading, a path of wanting more and more and more of everything, including great results, including
Yes.
self empowerment, including fulfillment, right? All of those things wrapped into one. That's why this show was born, was so that I could take all the conversations I had and be able to share them with the world for
Right.
others that learn like I do and want to continue learning.
That's phenomenal. Congratulations. That is so phenomenal.
Well, Nathalie, you are actively making it possible today, right here with me. So I'm going to say thank you. And I'm going to
Thank
say
you.
thank you too for being here and doing this collaborative build. Uh,
Absolutely.
Learning, and there's so many different ways to learn, right? I
Mhm.
was talking to in a leadership roundtable that I run. I
Right.
asked the question, I said, how do you learn?
Mhm.
And it was amazing, all of the conversation that came up about, well, I don't have time to learn, because we have
Oh
associated
wow.
learning with a classroom lecture style.
Yes.
And let's break that paradigm now. What are other ways
Right.
that you learn outside of that?
Podcast,
Mhm.
radio shows, conversation, um, Barnes and Nobles, hanging out, just kind of listening to conversations, but also reading books and magazines, basically anything I can get my hands on. Twitter, LinkedIn, all the social media sites, being able to research things very easily. Maybe also, maybe, you know, able to make conversations with industry leaders like you and other industry leaders that are really honing in on leadership, women's leadership, business, and those kinds of things. So it makes it real easy to do a deep dive and actually look and see what's really going on.
Yes. And it takes time to do that. So
It
what would
does.
you say to the people who, do we have to take the time to get to where we want to go?
Oh, absolutely. It's intentional. Everything is intentional.
And
And so you have time, whether it's 15 minutes in the morning, whether it's 15 minutes at lunch, whether it's 15 minutes in the afternoon. So you would be amazed at what the power of 15 minutes can actually do for your learning and also for you being able to attain your goals.
Mhm. You heard it here. I'm telling you, Nathalie, see, there's a reason that we came together when we came together and how we're doing
Ma'am.
this. And
Absolutely.
what I hear you saying is we have to fearlessly ask of ourselves also.
That's right.
there's this there's a fear of asking of others. I think there's a bigger fear of asking of ourselves, deciding what to say no to, because when we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else, and recognizing, are we saying no to our priorities?
Yes. And I was actually having a conversation with one of my coaching clients and talking to her about priorities. And I said, I can look at your calendar and determine what are your priorities. And I said, you know, you enjoy being the firewoman. You go in and you put everybody else's fire out. And they say when it comes back to your calendar and your priorities, then you don't have any energy and you don't have any hope that you can accomplish what you want to do because you've spent so much time giving to everyone else. And so you're absolutely right. You have to prioritize it. And when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
It's pretty profound when we think about it. By the way, that's something I'm doing in 2019 is I'm continuing to learn to say no more, better, faster.
Yes.
Go for more no. Go for more no. All right. We have another question from the audience here. This is from Manny. So thank you, Manny. I worked this one in. And that is, what happens if we can't find a mentor? Where and who could I look for?
Decide on what area you'd like to have a mentor in, whether it's leadership, whether it's communication, whether it's being bold, whatever it is. And really look at what can that mentor help you to attain. Start looking on LinkedIn is a great place. Twitter is a phenomenal place. And, you know, Facebook and some of the other social media platforms as well. Go find someone who's doing something that you would like to enjoy doing, or someone who's 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead of you in those areas that you'd like to have improvement. And make the ask. And if the first person says no, no problem. Keep asking.
That's right.
Because I always say sometime in leadership, you have to kiss a lot of frogs to get to the prince.
True that. True that.
And there are people that are willing to mentor you, but most of them have never been asked. That's the sad part about it. All these people that have all these gifts and talents and ability to do all these amazing things, but no one has asked them to mentor them, whether it's informal or formal.
So what makes it bold? What makes it bold to ask for what you want today?
Intention. Know what you want. Know what you want.
You hit it on the head. And, you know, I was writing down intention and knowing what you want. By asking, we must be clear. And it's almost like it's, I don't know if it's more of an infinity figure 8 circle, or if it's a whole circle, or if it's some other picture. But what's coming into my head is some sort of rounded edge that overlaps on itself, where when I have an intention, I've got to be clear. And when I can ask, I know that I'm clear. And when I get the answer, I can recognize if I'm clear yet, or I still must be clearer.
You nailed it. You nailed it.
Only because you were here today. You have seen my learning in action. So what final words would you leave with us today, Nathalie?
Just thank you so much for this opportunity to have this courageous conversation with you today. I am so excited about what you're doing with the Bold Business Radio. I am just leaping out of my seat. I want to encourage everyone to go out there and to be fearless, to be so confident and fearless, because if you have the intention and you ask for it, the sky is the limit.
You heard it here, and that's it. This is program 190 of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. All the show notes will be added to the website, voiceofboldbusiness.com/P190. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P190. You can also search the site for Just Ask Already. You can also search the site for Nathalie's name, Nathalie Gregg, and that's with 2 G's. All right, keep this conversation going. Rate this program. Use hashtag VBB Radio. Send us an email, radio@reddirection.com. Tell us, what are you doing to practice these asking for what you want, being fierce, having that intention, getting clear so that you can show up, because when we show up, we know we're modeling, whether people are looking at us or not. They could be looking at us straight on. They could be looking at us out of the periphery. They could be hearing about us from somebody else. And when we are consistent across those three, we know what we want, and we know we're acting in accordance. So let's learn from the experiences that Nathalie has shared. Let's learn from your experiences by continuing this conversation. And hop on over to iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and tell us what you've learned. Add your voice to the story. It's your practical application of what you hear here, as well as sharing the story for us to use what you have learned to continue to be the leaders that we would like to be today. And I want to know, when are you going to ask already?
The voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. When you aren't seeing the growth results you want, it's time to get an outside perspective. To discuss your specific situation around growth strategy, work with us. Visit voiceofboldbusiness.com and click Find Out More. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.